everyone, welcome to another episode of Plum Talks. Today we have a very experienced marketer and senior brand manager, Josh Weaver. Josh will be talking about how you can create an amazing marketing strategy for your e-commerce brand. Welcome, Josh. How are you doing today?
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Natasha. I really appreciate all the, lead up chatting we've been able to do on LinkedIn and getting to know more about you and Plum Talk and even just the purpose of these podcasts. It's been awesome. There's one thing I can do as I get older. It's impart knowledge, and I love any chance I get to. So thank you for having me.
That's awesome. They are already feeling the energy of the podcast. So
Okay.
just to start the conversation, can you provide us an overview about your experience in the field of marketing and
Sure.
e-commerce and how it led you to start creating such marketing strategies specifically?
Absolutely. I'll do the quick rundown. When I graduated from college, my background was in public relations, and the short end of how to describe that is storytelling. That was back in 2010, and social media was very much not being utilized, or at least provided enough attention at, really anywhere. It was kind of still a novelty, and even in some places you still needed a .edu account to sign up for. Sounds so funny saying, given how far we've come. But I transitioned public relations and storytelling into social media and marketing, and I started working at startups. I wanted to move as far away as I could from the cold Michigan where I grew up. So I moved to Las Vegas in the desert, and I worked at startups, learning very much from the ground up where marketing comes from, how it starts, how best to build a campaign, how best to build a campaign that will fail. I've learned 1,000 times how to fail for every one success I've had. And that led me to working with incredible companies like Zappos, which was later then bought by Amazon, where they're a social marketing lead for a bunch of our accounts on the Zappos team, and really shifting from the startup mindset to now working for one of the largest companies in the world. It was a bit of a shock figuring out how to take my bootstrap mentality into, well, now I can fund ideas that I have. After I left Zappos, I got a chance to work with a bunch of webcomic artists who were making content for social networks and building their own audiences. And I was helping them set up their e-commerce platforms on tools like Shopify and BigCommerce, and taking their content from just comics to physical printed shirts and mugs, and helping them build the e-commerce kind of from scratch in some cases. It was a lot of fun, and as I kind of helped train them out of a job, they no longer needed my help. They were marketing experts by then. I was able to join an agency for a little bit, but then was called by a friend who had started a company called Exploding Kittens. And Exploding Kittens, if you're not familiar, started off as a Kickstarter project where they were trying to raise $10,000, and they ended up raising $9 million. So they needed to build a company to support the large business venture that they just embarked on. And I was able to join the team in a marketing position to help them market the now 20 plus games that you can find on shelves at Walmart, Target, Amazon for sure. So I've kind of always been one foot in marketing, one foot in e-commerce. And now I'm currently working at an ad agency called Ad Leverage, in which we focus on being basically the marketing arm for local service businesses. Anything that you would need to, blank near me, from, museum to a personal injury lawyer and everything in between. That type of business needs a very specific type of marketing, and that's what we do here at Ad Leverage. And I've joined, as you were saying, as the senior brand and social manager. And that leads to today. Where that all sums up in is I learned 100,000 ways how not to make a campaign. And where every marketing campaign needs to start is with the audience. It's doing the audience work. It's finding out who they are, where they are, what they want, and how you can fit in. If you can figure out those four things, you're on the right path, right?
I'm sure we are going to talk about this, like these four steps, in the coming questions. So what I realize right now is that because you have worked in so many different areas and you have already worked with so many e-commerce brands as well, it gave you a perspective of the kind of campaign you must run. And I think
Mhm.
you have already realized that whether one campaign would work or not. Of course, it's
Yeah,
no guarantee that it would work or not, but you have a great experience. So that's what it is. Moving ahead, so could you share some of the most important metrics when we are talking about marketing strategy or even campaigns and key performance indicators you think that can emphasize for tracking the success of your marketing strategy?
sure. Yeah. The metrics and KPIs are, I it's so funny because I'm going to speak on it from kind of two angles. One, I know to all of the marketers that are listening, metrics and KPIs are kind of sometimes the last thing you think about, but it's definitely the first thing that any economist, business person, salesperson, CEO thinks about. So as a marketer, you need to kind of sometimes realize that, like, oh, this great idea maybe doesn't line up with what metrics and KPIs are important with the big boss, right? So the first thing I suggest before even going down a marketing rabbit hole is making sure that you're aligned internally with what metrics are important to, managers, bosses in the end, as well as KPIs, right? Because I can't tell you how many times that someone has come to me with, oh, we have so many impressions. And my response has been, that's great, but the KPI we were focusing on is conversions. And if you would have considered that from the beginning, you probably would have done a different campaign, or you would have put your paid money into a different bucket. So before you can even get started on your own next steps, make sure that the metrics that you have in mind, the KPIs that are important to you in your ideation of your marketing campaign, align with your boss and their boss's KPIs and metrics. Because it's great to have marketing numbers, and please keep those to the side. And even if they're not important to your biggest bosses, they're important to you learning more about your audiences. But then before you get started, the metrics that are very most important are the metrics that your bosses look at. I know it's kind of a cop-out answer, but that's the very first part to start. And I feel like sometimes people miss that very crucial strategy.
So as a let's take an example of one e-commerce brand or maybe the brand that you're working with right now. So what would you suggest if specifically for an e-commerce brand? What would
Uh-huh.
be the KPIs that they should make sure that is happening?
Yeah, great. So let's say you are trying to launch a product. The last company that I was in, Exploding Kittens, we made tabletop games. So I'll use a board game as an example because it's familiar.
Mhm.
But let's say you're launching a board game. The very first thing that you're going to do, probably before it hits the shelf, is talking about it. So your audience needs to be primed with brand awareness content. It's what is coming, what is it going to be, how is it going to fill a hole in your heart, what part of their life is your product going to fit into. And if you can answer those questions, because again, before you can, I mentioned this before, but it bears repeating, the audience needs to come first. Doing the work in who you believe your audience is, because from there it's a lot easier to answer questions once you know the who. You can then get to the what, when, why, where, and how, but the who is where it needs to start. What's funny is that wherever you start with that who, whoever you think your potential audience is, it will change. But once the campaign's in motion, then you get to learn more about your audience. Maybe this isn't the one we need to focus on, but in that work, that A/B testing that you need to constantly always be doing, that's how you find out your exact best customer. Once you have an idea of who your best customer is, we're going to fast forward to you've launched 2 or 3 games, and you know that your best customer is a mom buying for family entertainment. It's a lot easier to then back into, okay, this mother who is buying content for their family for entertaining, where is she spending time? How is she considering entertainment, throwaway purchases against buying groceries? Is this an appropriate place to market? Because this is definitely not on someone's priority list in this space at this time. Once you have a good, firm understanding of the who, a lot of those other metrics and KPIs come into place, because you'll be able to expand that audience. Your KPI should then turn into, if it's pre-launch of a game and you know who your audience is, the KPI should be making sure that by the time the game hits shelf, this many people have already heard of, liked, or talked about content that you've built. It very much is we could do hypotheticals all day, but it needs to start with the audience, because if you're starting with an idea and then trying to fit that into an audience's purview, it just doesn't work.
What I've realized is a lot of marketers, what they do is they start with the campaign first, and then decide their target audience, and then decide the
Yep.
KPIs. And
Yep.
this could be a reason that the campaigns doesn't really work as well as they wanted it to.
Absolutely.
Do you have any such experience wherein the campaign failed because of these reasons?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So this is what I love about the chat we're having today, is that like you and I have so much marketing experience that have led to us having these answers at this point. So it sounds so simple coming out of our mouths, but this is like 10 plus years of mistakes that led me to this thought. But it was before I had that the realization that I need to find a best customer. I was building campaigns, just like you said. I had an awesome idea. I would build the content. I would figure out the exact, posting schedule. I would know the platforms it was going out on. And then if someone asked me the question, who's it for? I'd be like, everybody. And like, that would be my answer, right? But that's not realistic. That's what you learn over time as a marketer, is that you kind of need to, of course, expand your marketing funnel, but you need to do it in specific ways, or you're going to lose out on building your best customer persona. You're going to lose out on really important data on who could be the best customer. So doing that pre-work to start with a very specific customer in mind is how I've found a easy way to avoid tripping up mistakes of, we had a great idea that wasn't for anybody, you know what I mean? Because it was for everybody. Yeah. Oh, that's a big one. It took me a long time to figure that out.
So that was an eye-opening moment. And
Oh yeah.
like you realize, oh my God, it's not for anybody, it's
I'm
for
like over
everyone.
here tearing up, thinking about all the campaigns that I could have done better had I just started. Like, if I could have gone back, right? If I could travel back 10 years in time, I would play stocks a lot differently. And I would be like, hey, start with audiences, start
Mhm.
with who you believe your best customer is. Because at the end of the day, you're, as a social media marketer, as a CRM marketer, as a whatever angle of marketing you focus on, if you know who you're trying to get to, all of these other pieces fall into place.
At Plum we have this theory that it's not really failure. We are actually learning from all these things, right? And as a
Oh yeah.
marketer, we have to believe on such points. So would you tell me, because we already talked about failure, would you tell me an experience wherein you were amazed by the success of a campaign because of all the lessons that you have learned throughout the years? Can you
Yeah.
share some example?
Yeah. Oh, sure. I and it's so funny you say that. Like, I feel like I've only realized those major successes now, right? Like years later, or even months after, when you're doing the postmortem and you're like, oh, it didn't do exactly what I wanted in this way, but it wildly succeeded in this way. So you brought up a really good point too that I'd love to touch on, and just really quickly. A lot of people put their own negative assumptions and meaning behind the word failure. And that always bums me out, because it's not a bad word. You just believe it to be, because you've tricked yourself into being scared of failure, thinking that someone's going to yell at you if you do, right? It's this, you've built your own assumptions into what comes behind a failure, that you forget that if you won everything every day, you would learn nothing, right? You would wake up and go to bed the same person if you never failed. And there's no growth in that. So whatever you can do is, as an aside, strip out all of the feeling, meaning behind the word failure, and like lean in, fail fast, because it's way better than never failing. So that aside, there have been some campaigns where you're in the middle of it and it doesn't really feel like it's catching. until you get to take a step back and look at the impact it's having. When I worked at Zappos, we didn't ever have sales. It wasn't something that the site did regularly. It was our what brings people to Zappos.com is our customer support, our service. You can buy 10 things, return 9 of them. You have 365 return. We had other things that made sales just less important. And we had a closeout site for that. So all the sales were on the 6pm.com, which was the closeout site of Zappos. So when it comes to things like Black Friday, we were just like, oh, how do we stand out when everyone is just putting everything for 80% off and calling it a day? And we had to think of more creative ways to do it. One of the ways that the team kind of got behind was, all right, well, if we're going to get, if we're going to do anything, we're going to do something we love, and we all loved animals. It was very much like it was an open campus. There were dogs everywhere. So we're just like, what if we covered the cost of pet adoptions? It's expensive. It's sometimes the reason somebody doesn't adopt. So we worked with a bunch of major organizations, and nationwide, from Black Friday to Cyber Monday that weekend, if you adopted a dog, we would pay for it. We'd pay for shots, we'd pay for food, we'd all the initial stuff. And when you're in the campaign like that, that's that busy, that quick, that specific time frame, it didn't really resonate until after we stepped away that we realized we had hundreds of celebrities talking about this. We had so many different aspects of brand awareness building that didn't necessarily result in sales that exact day, but had an incredibly strong fourth quarter because we were all over at that point, news articles and regularly, featured to like, oh, you guys did the sustain. I was like, yes, because sales are sweet, but they're not as important as your forever friend. We extended the campaign, and it was one of those that it was really just we were looking for a fun way to stand out, and it resonated so deeply that we had to shift and think, oh, this is a new audience set that we can be creating content for. Pet owners, you know what I mean? It's one of those things that we know, like, we would have personas and we'd have ideas of who our best audiences are, but it's one of those, like, if you're selling shoes and clothes, you don't really have a bucket that says pet owners, right? I mean, I'm sure that Zappos says, please don't let me speak for them. This is my now going back to my fake business where we're selling board games. But you could find an audience that is incredibly tuned in around a specific subject that is adjacent to yours, that adopts your story, your brand, your item, and then you'll find an entirely new audience you didn't know you had access to. So there were wins all over the place for that one. That was such a fun experiment adventure that it was a campaign we repeated for the last 3 years that I was there. And I hope they're still doing it. I haven't checked in a while.
So I think first of all, very fun campaign. I was enjoying listening to this. I'm very sure you were enjoying actually running the campaign. And I think the example that you shared right now, it was a great example for where marketing stands, because uh, all in throughout the entire campaign, what you were doing was creating the name and creating the influence towards the brand. And it was amazing because maybe it's a possibility that might not give result right now, but it could definitely give a tremendous result in the coming years.
Yes. The more technical you can get, the better you are at tracking your metrics, the deeper you can get into finding exactly who is interacting with you, the more powerful your marketing ends up being. So that campaign might not have sold shoes, but it really beefed up our audience persona. It really beefed up our ability to find relevant people to talk to in a way that we were then able to use paid ads, email. Like, we were able to then really initiate the rest of the marketing funnel into this new audience that we've found through a campaign that was adjacent to our project. So you're 100% right. Even if you're not getting conversions this second, that's of course an important metric and something that I know is a KPI that everyone always has, but like, make sure that you're going deeper than that. See what other audiences you can build out. See other ways that you can beef up your email lists, like through the same pieces, And make sure you're kind of looking at your marketing holistically. It's important to, of course, have one final metric and KPI. And again, that's the one that we were talking about before, is the one that's important to your bosses, right? Make sure that that one is front and center. But that doesn't mean that's where your work should end. You should then full funnel, make sure that as a holistic like marketing campaign, that you have a really good understanding of how it affected, lifted, changed the course of your marketing story.
Mm-hmm. Actually, Josh, I wanted to mention here, it's not just about marketing concept or strategy. I think the entire energy that you're bringing to this podcast, it's just hyping the entire podcast up. So, moving on, I think it's time we should talk about maybe the step by step procedure that you take these steps to make an entire marketing strategy for your audience. So, could you share an example or maybe the strategy that you use?
Yeah. I would say so. The easiest place to start is trying to think of how best to, because there's so many angles that I can answer this question. I feel like let's go back to the board game example. We're a company and we have a new game coming out, and it's coming out in a month. That's not enough time, but we're going to use this as a bad theoretical. So as you're coming towards the launch of your project, I'm sure you've done everything in the lead time, and if you haven't, this is your reminder to, before you can even consider marketing, make sure you have a style guide, a brand Bible, little pieces of like solid rock and foundation that you can build a marketing campaign off of. If any of these things are not ringing a bell or they're new words, like, please, there are so many people that are way better at describing what goes into a style guide or brand Bible than I am. And I highly recommend just doing a quick, even Google search for examples of. It'll have stuff like typography and fonts and hex code for colors, etc. Once you have all of those kind of basic foundational building blocks, it's a lot easier to get started. And then from there, audience analysis. Who is this product for? What does this person need? How is this going to fit into their life? Why do they need to be thinking about us? And from there, you kind of get to see, you'll notice that the more you do and the more you build marketing campaigns, they tend to unravel themselves in front of you instead of a time in which you would have to plot a course, right? If you find that you're like very physically having to pull out the red carpet yourself and it doesn't lay itself out, then you're using the wrong angle and perspective. Once you have the who, you'll have a pretty good idea of how to talk to them. And you'll then have a pretty good idea of where you can find them. So at this point, you're then able to look for what marketing levers should I pull to make this person the focus target audience for this campaign. Mm-hmm. As you're laying these pieces out, I've never found a successful marketing campaign that was built in a silo. Do everything you can to bring on other perspectives. Bring in, if you're a social marketer, bring in email. If you're really good at paid ads, make sure you're talking with SEO. It's reach out to the person who you feel like is the most opposite of a marketer for you, so you can use the value of their different perspective to illuminate other things you might be missing, right? So as you're building, even in the brainstorming phase, grab somebody for 5 minutes, pitch it to them, get their yes and feedback, and then get back to the drawing board. By the time you've done that a couple times, you should, again, you've finished your audience research, you figured out who you're going to talk to and where you can find them. You've brainstormed this idea and run it past a couple other people that have very different perspectives that can help really flesh out the marketing campaign. At that point, you're ready to have a meeting with everybody. You're ready to run through it from top to bottom as if it were to work perfectly. It never will, but walk through it like it's gonna win a Cannes Lion, right? You want to make sure that as the marketer, that's the energy you're bringing. If you are walking in and you're ho-hum, let's just do this again, that's about as good of a work as you're going to get done. So really hype yourself up, hype up your own energy, and hype the team, because then you're really going to get their best work out of it. You're really going to get their best interest. And plus, if they have questions, that's where you answer them. Don't feel flustered. Don't feel like they're peppering you with, they're just trying to break me. Like, this is where you get to do that. So when you finally press go on a campaign, you're ready for every possible iteration that could come at you. Of course, the one that always does is the one that you weren't prepared for. But going back to when you're building, as you have all of these pieces setting aside and you're building this campaign from the foundation up, at any point you're building on solid rock underneath you. So keep going that way of looping in the team, getting feedback, addressing it. By the time you press go, you should feel confident that A, you'll be able to set it, forget it, and it'll work as intended. Or B, that if someone has feedback, you know who on your team you could go to help. So it's this has kind of been like a 50,000, like a really high level version of kind of how I build my marketing campaigns. But at the end of the day, there are many meetings, there's a lot of conversation, there's a lot of rewrites. But when you press go on the campaign, you feel so great because the team is also there with you. So you can start off on your own, but don't build in a silo. Don't try to work in a bubble. Include other people in the setup process, get their buy-in, and make sure that they're as just excited about it as you are. And if they're not, then maybe go back to the drawing board a little bit harder. But at that point, you're really set together with a campaign that at least has the buy-in of the rest of the marketers whose days you're about to affect. One thing that I'll say, just to kind of wrap up this point, is don't forget every time that you press go, send, paste, whatever on your marketing campaign, you're about to affect everyone else's day. Because you're about to help their marketing, you're about to influx email, you're about to change someone's mind about a paid ad. So it's best to do that when you're all on the same page.
Absolutely. Josh, just to summarize for the benefit of the listeners, can you summarize these steps once very quickly?
Absolutely. The very first place to start when you're building a marketing campaign is identifying your audience. Once you've identified your audience, you then get to see who, what, where, when, how, and what, like, and how those kind of illuminate themselves, because you have the guiding North Star of who is going to participate in your marketing campaign. Once you have the who, start building based on where you can find them, and you'll figure out how to communicate with them. Loop in your team to make sure that they are not only providing feedback, trying to poke holes, but they have the same buy-in and excitement that you do. And that once you're at that point, press play, press go. There's no reason to hold back on a marketing campaign. You're going to learn more from it being active and failing than you ever would if it didn't send. So get it up, A/B test, do it again.
Wow, I think we need drum rolls for this one. It's very short, very crisp, and very useful. Thank you so much for sharing with me.
Absolutely.
I'm very sure it would be very helpful for our listeners when they are going to build their own marketing campaigns or the e-commerce businesses out there. Moving ahead, one thing that a lot of marketers might miss before starting a marketing campaign or before creating the entire strategy is the legal team and the legal perspective. And we have seen it working in a way wherein they're ready with the entire campaign, they're ready with the entire idea, but the legal teams comes in and they say that this is not happening. It would be not working for the company, and the we might go for litigations and other things. So can you bring in a perspective like how do we align with that factor, and have you ever felt or dealt with any such case yourself?
Oh, for sure. It's a whole nother podcast episode of all the times that I've had to meet with legal to make sure that an idea that we had would work. And there'd be another episode on how many times I said no. But as we're going through the process of making sure you have buy-in, that's one department that you should probably start with. It sounds silly that before you even go to the rest of your marketing team, just go run it by legal. Put it in the air in front of them, get their feedback, their buy-in real quickly. And then, of course, say, what questions do you have? And I will come back to you later with answers. Right? You can't walk into a lawyer's, like, you can't walk into a meeting with legal and expect to walk away with them just being like approved. It's their job to ask you a ton of questions. So set a 15-minute meeting, describe it to them, get all the questions possible, and then set a real meeting to be like, I've addressed everything that you could think of. What else? Right? It needs to be a collaborative with them. If you're going to do something crazy, at one point when I worked at Zappos, we were on tour with DJ Khaled and Beyonce for 6 weeks. We were covering it from the DJ Khaled's perspective, and he was hand delivering shoes to people who had purchased the day before. That was one of those things that as a marketer, you're just like, this is a dream. But as the legal, they're just like, I have 1,000 questions. And you need to make sure as a marketer that you are answering them. That is your job. Don't be annoyed. Don't try to push it off on somebody else, but meet with them early. Make sure that you're addressing their questions, because it will make everything else way easier on the back end.
Yeah. And I already shared it with you. I guess I come with a legal background, so it's a little bit easy for me. It's a little bit
So you're
easier for
welcome.
me.
And I'm sorry. You're going to get a lot more questions, but that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think I can already have that perspective in mind. Like, okay, I know
Good.
these things might, take us from happening, the marketing campaign from happening. One more thing I really wanted to discuss was when we were talking about the steps. Do you think only KPIs matters when we are talking about the success of a campaign? Like if we
Mm,
have suggested like these are the KPIs or metrics that we are going to focus on, or is there any other factor that can actually tell us that this marketing campaign was a big success? Of course, it depends on business to
yeah.
business what is their goal,
Yep.
but is there any specific thing or very common thing in every for
Yeah.
every business?
No, that's a really good question. So, of course, as we're saying, you want to make sure that the big boss's KPI is the focus. But as you're in your day-to-day in marketing, in your every meeting that you have with the rest of your team, as you're kind of sussing out the health of the business that your marketing team can affect, it's at that point that you should start internally setting your own KPIs that you're regularly reporting on your own. You know what I mean? It could be outside of giving it to the big bosses, but doing what you can to really track everything from, did this social media campaign push email signups, right? Like try to figure out how to holistically track it, so you can, and by holistically track it, I mean track it both from like a very specific, like this did well, it sold games, to how did this affect every like it sold games, but 1,000 people commented on the paid ads about how much they hated it because it had a strobe effect that they didn't like. Like,
Mhm.
so sure, some people brought the games, but you missed a huge crucial piece of evidence that they could have sold even more if you had fixed this one piece, right? So you very much need to do what you can to stay like have eyes in the back of your head when it comes to KPIs, where you're looking ahead at the final you have to report on, but you're looking back at the what could I have changed to had make this perform even better, and then how do I fix that for next time. Again, that's I feel like it's a cop-out answer. So I'm going to give you one specific metric. The
Yeah.
one that I always look for, the one that I always appreciate, is shares. Because what that says to somebody on social media, a share says, I like this content enough that I have to put it in your face. And
Mhm.
how often have you seen a TV commercial? How often have you seen a paid ad that makes somebody want to show somebody, right?
Mhm.
Like they're just like, I need to share this piece of content with you. Out of everything in the world I could be telling you right now, I'm sharing this with you. So when I see shares, I always kind of put my own little like happy smile on that with this is people interacting with, maybe not directly with you, because to be honest, my communication, my sharing it is with a friend. I don't need a brand coming in and being like, haha, Louis made that. Like, of course, we'll come to you when we need you. But like when you can look at in between the lines of what it means to really promote content that has high shareability, it feels so good. Right.
Yeah.
Even from like just a marketing standpoint, the piece of content I made, this human deemed cool enough to send to people. That's
Yeah.
such a cool feeling.
I think in today's day and age, sharing the content, especially on Instagram and Facebook, it's just the modern way of word of mouth marketing. It's
Oh,
just
for
the
sure.
modern way, right? And
Yeah.
one more thing, I recently, I think I've read it somewhere that Instagram algorithm actually shares your content more if it's more shareable, if people are
Yep.
actually sharing. even more
Exactly.
than likes and comments. If people
Yep.
are sharing it, they'll push your
Absolutely.
content, right?
Yeah,
That
because what you're doing is you're showing the algorithm that you are providing content within the like within the app to somebody else, which is going to keep them on the app even longer. When
Mhm,
we think of that one thought that we had earlier, we're like, what's important to the boss?
mhm,
What's important to the social media network is the same thing. And what's important to any of those algorithms is keeping people on it longer.
mhm.
So they're going to prioritize videos and shares because those are the two things that keep people on their app longer than a like in a picture, right? So if you can create content that satisfies what the algorithm wants, there you go. If you can create content that satisfies what the bosses want, there, you know what I mean? So as long as you're kind of keeping in mind that, you know, this is my perspective from a marketer, but what's important to a social media algorithm is different than what's important to a boss, which is different from what's important to a CEO. So as long as you can have the empathetic ability to look into each of their perspectives and then put them on a piece of paper being like, all right, this is for them, this is for them, this is for me, this is for the algorithm, you know what I mean? Like if you can separate it out like that, it'll absolutely help you track your metrics more efficiently.
So I think this is a note for our listeners that if you want your marketing strategy or campaign to work, create relatable or shareable content and it will boom out there, right?
Bam. Yes,
And
absolutely.
now it's time for the serious discussion. It's data, the data that we have to focus on. So being marketer today, we always have to focus on data. What do you think while crafting a marketing strategy or after the entire campaign works? What do you think is the best way of using the data that we receive from that campaign? And if we don't have any data before the campaign, how does that work, like the entire
Right? Yeah, that's a hard one too. When you're going in with no data, you're going in with the research you've done before and, you know, hope and a prayer, right? So the easiest thing you can do is just get started. You know what I mean? Get started and then figure out how to A/B test that as efficiently as possible. What I mean by A/B testing, for those who are unfamiliar, is if you are to show somebody a paid ad that has your logo, the product, and a green background, a A/B test means the A is the green background and the B is your logo, the product, and an orange background. You can then really quickly see which one performs better, take the winning, and then put it up against your logo, a product, and a yellow background, right? So continually iterating is the way that you get more data. So putting out a campaign and then figuring out what worked the best based on your internal KPIs, and then doing the same thing again, changing one thing. A/B tests to make sure that what you're focusing on, the data point that you're pulling in, is efficiently and effectively moving. Because if you are A/B testing, again, a logo, a product, and a color background, and you stick with that, you have no context of if it could be doing better. So, whatever you can do to take success that you've previously seen as data, replicate it and change one thing specifically, track the difference between the two, and then move forward with the winner. Whatever you can do, that's how you're using data to drive insight-led decisions. And I know I made a really, you know, simple example of like a paid ad with a different background, but I genuinely mean that for every aspect of any marketing campaign. From if you're looking at a landing page, making sure that half your audience goes to one and half your audience goes to another completely different setup so you can track the differences. And then it can happen at every level of marketing. Oh, excuse me. And I feel like the biggest benefit of that is you'll then get to see what aspects of your marketing campaign impact what data.
I totally agree because one of the key factor here is that sometimes it happens that we're not really sure about a few things, maybe font size, maybe the copy that we are writing. In case of email, the subject line. In these cases, the A/B test really works well because we get the clarity of what the audience really want to,
Yep.
see, what they are opening, what kind of emails they are opening. So that's these were the question. One thing that we might miss here was that if we are getting the data out of marketing campaigns, what best use we can bring out of that data if we are achieving any.
One of the things that is is just forever on the mind is making sure that it is trending positively, right? Like it's again, I feel like I answer such at a high level versus such a like I, I wish you gave me like if I had a really specific example. I should have had one queued up for this because you sent me the questions ahead of time to look at. But no, this was a hard one because I'm just like, I feel like every time that I do an A/B test, I learn a significant strategic adjustment that I should make. I feel like every time that I've gone down the rabbit hole of testing, A versus B, there is one piece that specifically stands out that is something that I wouldn't have considered. So, situation or something that I would really kind of point to look towards is what's a result that you weren't expecting? And then what can you do to drive into how did that happen? Right. And I'm trying to think of a specific example. Do you have a good example of one?
I think one way we can use data is to communicate with the people. Like if we are receiving data in some marketing campaign, let's say for Black Friday, we receive some email ID, we can stay connected with them. We can use that data in such ways.
I mean, I it's such a now. I'm going to be totally honest. I probably should have led with this, but I surround myself with team members who are way better at giving me feedback and we use tools. It doesn't need to all rest on your shoulders anymore, right? There comes a time in a marketer's life where they realize that, wait a minute, I have friends that I need to ask. I have people around me that I can ask for help. So I have very much done everything I can to always make sure that I have that support group around me that can help look at the same data that I'm viewing from a different perspective. And that I think has probably been what's led to the most strategically important changes that we've made is getting a totally different perspective to look at the same data and be like, oh, that's weird. And then you're going to get your mind blown every other day because you're going to be experiencing the concept of Sonder, where every single person around you has a life just as specifically highly detailed as your own, but with completely different perception. So you can look at the same two numbers and see two totally different things based on your backgrounds. And that itself has led to the most strategic advance that I think I've ever run across.
That was a great point. Looking at one data, like looking at one particular data sheet with different perspectives gives
Yep.
you, there's a huge possibility that you, being one marketer, can ignore some facts, or it might just not, you know, signifies the same to you as other
Right.
people's perspective as
Exactly.
well. Great example. So, Josh, these were the questions from my side, and I really enjoyed this. Any other thing, any additional thing that you would like to share with our audience?
Man, well, please feel free to find me, Josh Weaver on LinkedIn. If you ever want to pepper me with questions, I'm always open. Natasha knows this well. Really, it's one of those things that one of the fears that I always had to overcome as a marketer was like the blank page or like the just getting started fear, where like something's going to happen and this campaign that I put this much effort into isn't going to succeed. Like, yeah, maybe, but you won't know until you start. So there's so many people that are just waiting for it to be perfect, but don't let greatness get in the way of good. Don't let that's not how that phrase goes. Don't let there's a really smart phrase by somebody really smarter than me that said something along the lines of don't let perfection get in the way of getting content out. And
Yeah.
it'll come to me the moment we finish this. But until then, get started, know your audience, and talk to your legal team.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to know the real face, you can connect with Josh
Yeah, you got to find me.
later.
You got to find me on LinkedIn, or you can follow me on Twitter at Josh Weaver.
Definitely, we'll add your the links to your so that people can
Oh,
connect with
perfect.
you in the description as well. So thank you once again. Thank you so much, Josh. It was amazing to talk to you. Just once again, your energy is fabulous, and all the
Thank
insights that
you.
you gave me, I'm pretty sure that it will be very helpful for our listeners. Thank you so much
Awesome.
for being here.
Thank you
And
for your time and thank you for having me.
And with that, we reach the conclusion of this podcast. If you have enjoyed our discussion today, we invite you to explore more insightful episodes on our website or YouTube channel. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to show your support. We also have a very special treat for marketers seeking to enhance their skills in PPC marketing. Visit our website and explore our free academy section, exclusively designed to provide valuable resources and knowledge in this field. And to connect with marketers like yourself, join our Slack community for marketers. Details given in caption below. Thank you.